Well, hello, creative community and kind folks out there. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. This is the channel where we take a subject, we stretch it out all week, and for an hour each day, Monday through Friday, we talk about tabletop RPG games. Yeah, that's what we do here. And today is one of my favorite days. It is Third Pillar Thursday. Gots to have myself some third pillarisms on Thursday. Well, what is Third Pillar Thursday? Well, I will tell you. Third Pillar Thursday is the third pillar of gaming. The first and second pillars are combat and social interactions, respectively. I will tell you that yesterday issue we had an issue with the streaming. It seems that I did not pray to the streaming gods, and it looks like we are having an issue right now. I'm sure some of you are seeing some pretty bad stream rates going on, and it looks like my performance streaming out to multiple platforms is not good. All right, we've got a green indicator. Hopefully this will last. Maybe part of this is my fault for having a show that is simulcast on YouTube, Twitch, and the audio getting punched out to Discord. But we're going to keep on going. I'm sure many of you out there who interact with this channel on various platforms, if not all of them simultaneously, will let me know. But unfortunately, I am a one-man show, and unfortunately, I don't have. Again, I often don't give tribute to the streaming gods, so they're gonna have to take me or leave me, as as it were. Third Pillar Thursday. All right. So if you've tuned into this channel and you're brand new, this week's subject is badassery. Now, I understand that badassery in its normal context is not really a real thing, but bear with us here in the tabletop RPG community that I'm here to tell you that badassery and the idea of embracing badassery is a real thing. So, as pertains to the thumbnail, and you know me, I tend to talk a lot about movies and television shows and books and other mass media. One way of embracing the idea of letting your player characters be badasses in whatever game you're playing, Dungeons and Dragons and everything else beyond that, is to basically accept the fact that they are the heroes, they're the ones that should be looking good, and why not let them look good while they're doing it? And a good way to do this, if you are someone who it feels a little bit uncomfortable with using minion rules that we've talked about, or using some kind of some kind of mechanical, giving your player some kind of mechanical advantage or something. Something I think that is underserved in the RPG community in general, and often overlooked, is the idea of the environment. And as you guys well know, that if you really take a look at some of your favorite intellectual properties, especially movies and television shows, a lot of them take place in some really cool locations. So think of your game as you being a director, and you are scouting out locations for really incredible things to happen. So scout out a location, think of some start out and think of some amazing places for you to have these great confrontations that are going to happen in your game. Are your PCs trudging through the Undercity into the sewer system, walking through ankle deep up to waist deep waters in dark caverns or dungeons or something underneath a major city, or delving down into the Underdark? Are they walking through black and opaque waters, going around maze-like corridors, climbing up, scaling down, hearing the rush of water, dripping from the ceiling, pushing their way through webs, confronting closed iron gates, rusted locks and gears, and the mechanisms rusted through centuries of moisture and neglect. Are they walking through city streets, packed with people and individuals having their head down during a nasty rainstorm, as dark alleys are stacked with trash and debris. Maybe there are people who are smell of desperation and hopelessness, huddling in darker corners. This applies to both medieval cities and maybe something like a cyberpunk city, where it's just it's nothing more than a brown down and neon lights, and it just seems like it's overcast and dark and just packed with humanity and robots and hover cars and maybe you're going even higher and you have a medieval city and something takes place on the rooftops, as there are flat rooftops, one rooftop higher than another. There are walkways and ledges and catwalks and bridges, and of course, gaps large enough to jump, but not too wide enough that you couldn't really make them, across alleyways. Maybe there are slanted rooftops, clothing lines where tapestries and people's underwear are, strung across alleyways and on top of rooftops and things. I mean, you can go, mind you can go down a rabbit hole of very amazing locations to have things happen. And if you're just thinking of a backdrop, go ahead and do it. There's nothing more interesting. There's no way to better make something memorable, especially if you take a very boring encounter. What the most boring encounter I always talk about are like conflict with goblinoids, right? Your orcs, your hobgoblins, or bugbears, or something. We can maybe zombies and skeletons might be more boring, or whatever. But where does this happen? Is it happening on a typical open road with the environment not really having any effect in the game, or is this happening on the wing of an airship, or the deck of a ship in a storm-tossed sea, or in the deep caverns of the Underdark during the explosion of a volcano, or out in the vast tundra of the Arctic with hands clawing at you, skeletal hands clawing at you from the frozen ice beneath you, as you're standing on a frozen lake and unsure how far away the either shore is, and knowing that if the undead hands are reaching for you, that the ice will be cracking beneath you. uh I like that. I like that. Tesla Ranger says, Dead Man's like, goblin skeletons? Yeah, right. Yeah. Tesla says, benevolent architecture. The way the place is built is uncannily appropriate for your situation. Yeah. Hell, in the thumbnail, I believe it's a construction site. How many cool things can happen on a construction site, right? All right. So the first thing is scout out your location. And you haven't gotten to the point about having the environment happen yet, but just come up with a really cool location for something to happen. So if you're confronting bad guys at a construction site, maybe the MacGuffin, kidnapped prince, magical gemstone, or whatever. Maybe it's dangling by a rope off of one of the spars in a construction site, or maybe someone is in a dangling iron cell, dangling from a long chain over lava or acid or raging river, or a spiked pit or something like that. Like, play with height, play with space. Have instead of the PCs just being on a flat plane in a one of your fantasy cities and just coming around the corner and wanting to confront the PCs, throw a couple of those enemies up on a rooftop. Maybe a couple of different rooftops. Maybe 3 of them are on a balcony. 4 more are on a rooftop. Maybe 2 more are in the sewer systems, looking with their beady eyes, looking out of the sewer grate or something. Like, place them in different locations. Some of them maybe behind cover. Others hiding in the crowd. And then, of course, assumed professionalism, right? If you want your players to be badasses, how many times have we seen a spy movie where someone ineffective goes into a location and the hero says, there's 2 people on a roof, and if I was a sniper, I'd be up in the crow's nest, up in the top of the rafters, and you see the spy like scan the area and they know where everyone's at. Yeah, don't bother. Perception check, sure, you can do that. If you want assumed professionalism, just give them the information. Commoners, they don't know, but you've lived this life of living on the edge for so long, on the other side of the law. If it was up to you, you know exactly where these individuals would be. Now you can also do a combination of the two. The PC knows where there are 7 enemies. Make a perception check to see if you notice the other 15 more, or whatever the case may be. Deadman says most castles have stairways that are curved to the right as you climb the stairs in real life. Thus, climbing the stairs puts you at a disadvantage when you go to strike and you hit your arm on the wall. I've heard about that too, that they end up curving to the right because that's the walled narrow end of your arm, so you would want to reach out with your right arm to keep balance. And if I'm not mistaken, many ancient Japanese castles were designed in such a way that it would inhibit a direct line of attack, so that they were made like mazes. They also had switchbacks so that you could have like murder holes in locations. And why not take advantage of those things? Have murder holes, have sloping stairs, have combining all those things. And you guys know me, I am a third pillar-ist at heart. I'm someone who thinks that the environment should absolutely have a part in the game. And I'm sorry. And I understand that because it's a muscle that is not often used, if at all, that it can seem confusing, even daunting or complicated. But I'm here to tell you that a stat block for a creature is far more complicated than adding in torrential rain or ice or thunderstorms or high winds or snow or sandstorms or something more man-made, like slick rooftops or the possibility of a collapsing building in an abandoned location, or floodwaters, or maybe a dam is broken, or that sewer system the PCs are going through. They hear the sound of rushing water down a long hallway, and all of a sudden a wave of urine and feces infested water comes flowing towards them as they are trying to open up an iron grate that's at the end before the tunnel floods or something. All these places, all these things are cool in my particular opinion. Now, if you're not really used to wanting to reflavor or reskin those traps and those layers and those spell abilities, or hell, even reskinning creatures as an environmental effect, an example would be, reskinning an air elemental as like a storm of the century or something. Not necessarily making it alive, but using the air elemental's effects to blow through like a wind tunnel or something. And the creature is in a location or represents a particular hazard that the PCs are trying to avoid. An example would be classic movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and he's fighting a big guy. He's trying to punch and kick this big soldier. I think it's World War I, and they're fighting in and around a prop plane that, of course, accidentally gets moved off of his blocks and it starts spinning around in a circle. And so it's not just the hero fighting off a big bad guy, but the hero is also looking around like, I don't want to get my ass chopped up by the propeller plane. But guess what he does? The hero, not having an effect on the adversary, basically tricks the bad guy to standing in the location where the blade chops the bad guy up, right? Indiana Jones running across a rope bridge. How common of a trope is a rope bridge, you know? So one thing we can do to make the characters feel a little bit more of a badass is to include these elements, but don't make those elements too difficult to overcome. They might modify what's going on, but they may not completely disrupt what's going on. So one way of doing that is to use skill challenges. And I know I've seen through various threads that some people are unsure how to have a skill challenge. And skill challenges can come in different flavors. Sometimes a skill challenge is one person against another. Grappling is a perfect example of one person against another, like a tug of war. And that tug of war could be represented in any number of ways. A tug of war actually works very well for a chase, especially two or more people trying to get to a MacGuffin that's at a particular location. A perfect example of a tug of war skill challenge would be the proverbial gun laying on the ground and two individuals both of them are trying to reach for the gun. The gun could be some other kind of MacGuffin, whether it's a computer chip or a magical scroll or an arcane ring or important documents, missives that need to get behind enemy lines and get to allies that are trapped or something, and these particular documents will give them a way out, or it could be blackmail information. Whatever the MacGuffin is, it's usually out of reach of both the pro and antagonists, and they both need to try to get to it before it's burned, falls off a cliff, falls down into the sewer grate, whatever the case might be. And so a skill challenge you could pick a particular skill, whether it's athletics or acrobatics or sleight of hand or something, both individuals, and then of course the challenge is each side using their skill. Whoever receives the most successes wins. Now you can do that as a one and done, right? Initiative would be an excellent way of doing a skill challenge, doing like a micro initiative, right? If you want to make something a little bit more dynamic. I understand that the baseline for initiative now is to roll once and then everyone just does the round robin. But if you want to do a micro initiative, whether you and the lizard man can both reach for the key and see who gets to it first, you could do like a dex check or something like that, and whoever gets the highest roll gets there. Now you can take those same skill challenges and extend them out so that in a mounted chase, for example, both sides can do like animal handling checks, and the goal is whoever gets the first 3 successes wins. Riding across a vast field or the tundra or flying on mounts or something. You could do this through time, meaning like within 3 rounds, whoever gets the most successes wins. So you could do it as a time factor, much like the slamming of a door, the eruption of a volcano, the falling of a building or a wall or something like that. There could be some kind of escalation happening, a meteor swarm, a sandstorm coming along, and it's like it's a Mad Max type world, and you're trying to drive or run or get to safety before the danger strikes. Again, that could be through a time factor. You could just roll. I'm stealing this from Runehammer's rule that he has in the ICRPG. He says, take a D4, roll it on the table. You don't even have to tell your players why, and use it as a countdown timer. Up in 3 rounds, the sandstorm's going to hit. What do you do? Now, if you want to go even further with, say, the skill challenge, skill check kind of thing, you could have elements like Tesla says, a benevolent architecture idea. The locations like uncannily set up for like these cool things to happen. And yeah, it's a nudge, nudge, wink, right? The hero having a fight in a construction zone. I can see right now in your heads, if I just pause for a second, construction site. I don't care what time period, just think of construction site. I'm sure each of you has already thought of 3 things that you've seen in television or movies or even video games that are dangerous or cool or slick. There are plenty of video games that take advantage of it. I'm looking at you, Zelda, and many other games that use the environment to set up a puzzle of activity to get a thing done, right? It's the I need to push the heavy stone block into a location so I can jump up to get to a certain spot, but there's also enemies attacking me. So do I stop? Do I not move the stone block and attack the enemies, or do I move the stone block for fear that the enemies are going to snipe me with arrows or something, right? It's giving them a choice. And so you could have a location set up where the PCs are able to look like badasses by basically mixing and matching and using parts of the environment to their advantage. So, a rooftop run. Maybe the PCs are running across the rooftops and they're jumping from location to location, looking really cool, slow motion, knees pulled up tight, arms splayed out with weapons and things. You gotta do the really slick parkour, tumble rolls and things like that. And remember, we're talking about badassery. First of all, there are people in real life today that are very skilled in parkour, but maybe you want to include something like that in the game. So, as a narrative, do you want your players to be able to do these things? Well, you don't have to change a single rule. You can just describe these things as being very cool, right? Hey, make an acrobatics check. Great, your dwarf jumps across the roof, and tell me what happens. My dwarf, despite having stubby legs and stuff like that, has powerful thighs and launches himself across the rooftop, landing on the other side, rolling to a standing point and running for it, drawing his battle axe to attack the bugbears that are on the other roof side, trying to attack my MacGuffin or something. You could describe it any way you want to. Maybe the wizard isn't very good at it, but makes the role, and the player character who's like really invested in it is like, well, my character's not very acrobatic, but I jump across the rooftop and hang on by a thread with my fingertips, and I pull myself over the ledge onto the top, happy that my feet are no longer dangling, 3 stories above the alleyway below where the guards are raising their fists at me. I take a deep breath, I run, I get to my feet, and I keep on going. And that could just be descriptive. On the other hand, by having the player characters move around the environment, it could be to their advantage. If they are being attacked by lizard men and they jump across the Underdark chasm to get to the other side, now maybe it's better, while the lizard people are hissing and raising their fists at the player characters, it just means that they just got away from them, or got away from them at least temporarily, i.e. splitting the party of the bad guys and letting it work in their benefit. You can go even further by having, much like kobolds and goblins having traps set up around, maybe the environment lends itself to having things available for the player characters to use and abuse. And I'm a huge proponent of using and abusing the environment, whether it's getting into a construction vehicle and letting it, turning it on and letting it run rampant, to having cranes with scaffolding and heavy iron beams, or you're in the docks and there's a mechanical crane lifting merchandise out of a sailing ship, and the PCs I'm going to shoot my arrow to cut the rope so that it falls down or something, or I want to jump up. My character is an excellent archer. I've got my crossbow, and I'm gonna climb up the crane and run across the long spar of the arm and set myself up on top of the pallet that's dangling there. I don't know, 80 feet in the air or something like that. Just letting your players use and abuse the environment is great. And if your players are not really used to doing it, because it is a muscle that's kind of atrophied in the tabletop RPG community, then have your bad guys start to do it. Have your bad guys start to move levers so that the flood waters start to move in and around the levees in this sunken type style city. Let the enemies hide underwater, using blow tubes or something before they jump out of the water like ninjas to grapple the PCs in nets and pull them down to drown them in the water and stab them uncontrollably or something. Have the dwarven foundry, with flames blasting out of a furnace, and the enemy tries to kick the PCs towards the open grate of the furnace, or there's like buckets of tonnage of molten ore moving along conveyor lines, and the bucket is pouring the molten ore into molds, and the enemy uses a mechanical lever or something, or maybe has a blade at the throat of a dwarf or gnomes or whoever, deep gnomes that are doing it, to pour the molten ore, to try to pour the molten ore on top of the PCs. Also, you could lead the environment into dangers in which the player characters could feel threatened and then turn the tide, right? Because the environment shouldn't be, yes, a lair as described by, say, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, a lair tends to be something that is only beneficial to the individual living in it, whether it's like a black dragon in the black dragon's lair, or a beholder living in its own lair or something. But the environment should be pretty neutral. So if the PCs fall into a fire giant's mold of a big giant sword, and it's almost like a half-size pit, and then overhead of them there's like the foundry is about to pour molten ore into the pit. The PC, jumping out of the pit, making their save, but then pushing one of their enemies into what looks like a sword-shaped pit, might be a thing. For those of you who are out there like yourself, Omen, and anybody else who loves to be part of these live chats and stuff like that, don't apologize to me. You don't owe me anything like that. Take place when you can, and if you're having technical difficulties like I was, or maybe still am, don't worry about it. Oh, I'm getting a green light, and a steady green. Yay! The streaming gods have shined down upon me. Now, along with using the environment, again, narratively, letting the player characters kind of shine in the location that they're at, meaning like the warrior standing in the way of enemies while the PCs run for it, and the innocents run for safety, and the one PCs basically does the thou shalt not pass moment, or the player character that's really good at sniping things is in a particular location where they're able to snipe enemy after enemy, almost like a zombie horde, hoping to shoot enough enemies before they are completely overcome or something like that. Or the PCs that are running along on a vast plain, and 100,000 strange fantasy styled water buffalo are stampeding towards them, and so the PCs are both worried about getting trampled, but also using the stampede as cover, as miles of dust kicks up from the stampede across the open plains, and they're running from enemies or something like that. Just basically embracing the environment and letting it shine for the player characters to show off their badass nature. As a matter of fact, you could even go even further and a Tempest cleric, right? A really popular build for a Tempest cleric to summon the power of storms and lightning, electricity, and allowing the PC to be at the top of a mountain or it in the wizard's tower that just happens to have a lightning rod that you know brings its own dangers, but really allows them to really go above and beyond their own capabilities, or the paladin who's standing alone to face the enemies and stuff. I'm looking at you, Captain America, fighting off getting ready to stand against an enemy, and then, despite being ostracized from the paladin's order, all of a sudden behind them they hear a voice, or they hear footsteps, or they feel the rumble of hooves across the plains, and they look over the hill, and across the hill from as far as the eye can see, their allies show up at the last minute to help them in their time of need or something like that. Now, sure, you could claim that this might be a Deus Ex Machina where it's unexpected, but if this is this event has already been foreshadowed in your game, to have it happen, and of course not to overshadow what the PCs are doing, but Captain America's not going to stop a whole horde of alien invaders and whatnot, right? But when their allies show up, now Captain America can go toe to toe with Thanos and the major Thanosian black guard that's Thanos's right hand individuals, right? So there's nothing wrong with having that happen, especially if it leads to the story, or you're dealing with a horde of animals or monsters, or open portal to the nine hells and devils start rushing through and things. Yeah, it's having those things and confronting it, and letting the PCs pull on those threads. Now, one of the hazards and pitfalls of falling into using the environment is not or changing the parameters of a game that you and your players have already agreed to. So an example is, since we're talking about Badassery this week, we're talking about very cinematic action, and what you don't want to do is overlay too many aspects of realism and grittiness, rules wise, onto your cinematic action. Meaning, like, player characters want to do the Assassin's Creed roof jumping and things like that. The style of Assassin's Creed is, you can just very easily mimic as a narrative, right? But what you don't want to do is go, well, okay, I'm going to need you to make 3 athletics checks or you're going to suck, because the more it's part of what I call my personal rule of 3 when it comes to cinematic environmental action, and that is, the more you ask your players to make rolls, the greater chance they have of failure. 1 roll, you got 1 point of failure. 3 rolls, now you've got 3 points of possible failure, without a noticeable benefit to having such a thing happen. So an example is, if you start asking for your players to start making far too many athletics checks and knowledge checks and charisma checks and things, the more you ask them to do that, are they overcoming a penalty? Are they overcoming something that will benefit them? Meaning, like, there's a storm-tossed ship, and everyone has to make a roll. If they fail, they're going to fall prone and slide around on the deck of the ship and possibly get swept off the deck of the ship by the powerful waves. So the benefit to succeeding in the roll means that they don't get swept off the deck of the ship, of course, right? Failure means that harm comes to them. But if their PCs are roof running and they're trying to run from roof to roof, and you're saying, well, you need to make every round, you need to make athletics check as you run from place to place. Yes, failure would mean falling, but what does success build for them? Does that give them greater space between their enemies and the city guard is trying to chase them both down on the street level and on the rooftops? Does it give them a tactical advantage, i.e., I've got the higher ground, Anakin? Does it allow them to do that? Is making these checks allowing them to get to a position where they can, hey, you said there's a water tower, and you're like, I know water towers may not be in a medieval city, but in my fantasy city, there's a water tower. And one of the PCs is, great, I got this great idea, because I'm gonna bust the bottom of the water tower and have the water spill out and wipe away the guards that are coming after me, or something like that, right? We're in the Underdark, and above you is a ledge with rocks balanced precariously. And one of the PCs is like, cool, my rogue's going to climb up there, and then I'm going to wedge myself between the boulders, and I'm going to try to push the boulder over the edge, and hopefully the rocks will come down and choke off the entryway to the cavern or something. If it gives them a benefit, go right on ahead. That way you have a mechanism of failure or success. But if a PC is like, hey, I want to do an Assassin's Creed and jump from rooftop to rooftop and land in a dive roll and keep on going, and you're like, that doesn't sound realistic. I'm going to have to ask you to make an athletics check to jump, and then a dex check to see if you can get to your feet, and then a thing. Once you start doing that, if you've already agreed for cinematic action, you are going to do a Pavlovian training exercise in which your player characters will always they'll want to stay away from the cool action. They'll want to refrain from the narratively sweet thing to do and stick to the spammable, boring thing to do. It's the idea of like being penalized for describing how you want to hit the thing about the head and shoulders. Well, my best attack is to hit it with my battle axe. I'm going to hit it with my battle axe again, right? And as a game master, you're like, really, Warlock, Eldritch Bolt again? Well, if you're not offering alternatives for expertise, if you don't offer a few alternatives, and sometimes you're going to have to hit your players over the head with a clue stick. Like, hey, guy, listen, there's something else you can do in this situation that might be more effective. And effective, getting across the idea that damage and effectiveness, while they run in the same circles, are two different things. The rogue that climbs up to the upper ledge of a cavern with precariously balanced boulders that wants to knock them down may be more effective in choking off the insect horde that's been going after the PCs far more than the player character who's dealing out damage to the acid spitting ankheads that keep spilling forth through the small opening to the hive that's next to them in the vast underdark cavern, right? So allowing the PCs to come up with ways to be far more effective, and I think it behooves us to allow that to happen. And again, like I said, there's very few examples in tabletop games that allow you to do this. The only game I can think of off the top of my head, and mind you, I am not experienced with every single permutation of all tabletop games. The one game I can think of is the game Fate. And the game Fate uses something called aspects, and the game is tied around the idea of player characters using aspects to enhance what it is they are doing within the narrative of that particular situation. So if there is a abandoned building and there's a fire and there's a chance the steps might collapse and so on and so forth, right? There's rotten timbers and spiked boards and all kinds of things. The game Fate literally grants bonuses to using the aspects in the location that they're at to enhance what the PCs are doing. So if a PC is like a martial artist and they're fighting bad guys or something, they're like, well, I'm going to use the aspect of burning abandoned building to, punch and kick and spin kick and uppercut, pummel this individual into the fire, which makes my attack enhanced, getting, because fate aspects tend to be, they tend to run the +2 -2 gamut, right? So you're like, okay, I'm going to use the fire to add to my attack. Oh, can I use the aspect of collapsing ceiling? You're like, yeah, it's there. Like, oh, cool, I got a boost, so I'm going to use the fire and the collapsing ceiling to add to my attack, and I'm going to describe it as I'm going to do a slow motion spin kick him in the jaw. He's going to fall into the fire, and the collapsing ceiling is going to fall down on top of him. That's the kind of thing. Uh, Deadman says the main difference between tabletop RPGs and CRPGs, I guess you mean computer RPGs. Tabletop RPGs allow for the cinematic elements to exceed the basic operations of the system. Absolutely, and mind you, I think one of the fears that we have sometimes running a game is the unknown, right? So I describe the Underdark Cavern as you can hear the trickle of water to one side of the room. There's a ledge with, stone that's crumbling to the left side of the room. In the middle, there, you start describing these things, and you had no intention, zero intention of anybody actually using any of these things. Or hell, maybe you had kobolds, and you had every intention of having the kobolds dump the loose, the rocks down on the PCs, but then maybe one of the PCs is one of the PCs turns the tides and decides to use the very trap against the kobolds or the Ankhegs, because the kobolds have been eliminated or they ran for it, right? You didn't have any intention of that happening, but don't be afraid. It's not going to ruin the game. It's not. Believe you me, these one-offs are not going to burn down your world, right? Yeah, Omen's like, Into the Unknown, Frozen 2. Yeah, you sometimes, mathematically speaking, one game master against 4 players, they have 4 times as much brain power in general. So they're going to come up with 4 times as many unique aspects of what situations that you've introduced that you are not going to be prepared for. It's just a given. And for us to embrace that, to understand that, 3 against 1, 4 against 1 in terms of the brain power, you're not going to win. Yes, you can come up with the greatest plot ever in your own mind, and then you have 3 individuals go, I don't see the Vampire Lord being the bad guy because it really doesn't make sense. I kind of see the Aboleths, using the Vampire Lord, and you're like, I wasn't trying to include Aboleths and the Vampire Lords together. It's 2 different games, right? But if their idea is like, ooh, that actually makes sense, and you let go of this thing you've been holding on to, let it go. Yes, I know the song. Maybe, just maybe, you might have something more dynamic, and the environment is a perfect example of that, where the player characters, believe you me, if you place an explosive or an accelerant anywhere in your world, the PCs are going to use it. So expect it. If you have a warehouse full of acid, black powder, I don't know, an atomic weapon or something, the PCs are going to use it. So if you introduce it, you might as well just understand that they're going to, again, burn the town down. So if the PCs are like, I'm going to shoot my laser rifle at the barrel of alien goo that's sitting in the warehouse, just go, man, I didn't even think of the stats for the alien goo. I figured they wouldn't touch it. And you're like, yeah, of course the PCs are just like dipping their finger in it, tasting it, like, that's alien goo. Hey, taste this. And they're like, yeah, let me taste it. You're right, that is alien goo. They're gonna poke and prod that kind of stuff. And again, if you really want the PCs to tumble around in sudden 0G inside of the space habitat with heavy merchandise moving and flipping and moving around in arcs of random activity while the PCs are trying to find a handhold in a zero gravity and fighting their enemies as one enemy is slowly trying to scramble towards hand over hand to scramble towards the emergency airlock switch to dump everybody out into the void. Yeah, you might want to say, you know what? Yeah, common sense would say that, this, but this is more cinematic. All right, guys, everyone's going to have to make every round is going to have to make a zero G roll or something. And one of the PCs raised their hand like, well, I'm just holding on for dear life. Like, why do I have to make a roll? And you go, you know what? You're right. Okay, so if you have zero movement, you can just hold on to something and hold on tight. All you need to do is make a strength check so you don't get sucked out into the void. But if somebody's trying to move around or flow around in the zero G or climb past the tumbling heavy merchandise that was placed here in the docks from the other ships that landed, you guys are going to have to make rolls, or everybody roll a d10, and if you roll a 1, you're going to be targeted by one of these heavy beams or pallets of equipment that's floating around or something. You can come up with any kind of mechanism and allow that mechanism to be neutral. So maybe one of your bad guys gets crushed by a pallet of freeze-dried food or something. Who's to say? Maybe one of the bad guys that wanted to open up the airlock in the first place gets sucked out into the airless void and gets their lungs, all the air departs out of their lungs and other open orifices, and their body gets frozen. Right. So you don't know. And allowing the surprise of that to happen, I think, is far better than trying to hold on with an iron grip to your setting. You know what I mean? So anyway, the environment, me personally, I think the environment is a really cool tool without having to really modify your adversaries to really make your player characters look like badasses. And again, having a chase, PCs riding on the hoods of sports cars, PCs riding on flying mounts through the upper towers of a towering city or something like that. Relegating a lot of those things into the background as just very descriptive, I think is a very easy way to make people feel like they're badasses and make it very memorable without adding a lot of unnecessary nuances and roles and penalties and things of that nature. Like player characters jump onto flying mounts, and maybe you're like, okay, you can get like a giant eagle. Oh, sorry. Maybe there's like a giant eagle. Maybe there is a griffin, maybe there's a pegasus or something, and maybe the enemies are riding on wyverns. I like wyvern rather than wyvern. Wyverns, manticores, and what's something evil that fly? Giant bats. Okay, so now you have this chase, this flying chase, and it's theater of the mind, and everyone's worried about, like, okay, where's positioning and how far away is everyone, and I don't know. And you're just like, listen, guys, we're going to do this like a movie chase. You're flying in and around towers, flying underneath. You have to have a fantasy city with no handrails and bridges that span from one tower to another without, of course, the towers are I don't know, 20 stories tall without elevators. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it too much. But maybe there are banners and tapestries blowing in the wind, and so you just say, listen, guys, there is no specific place you're located. Everyone's flying, diving, dipping, trying to ascend, descend, turn around. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make a chart or a randomized thing or something, and if you make your animal handling checks, you can place yourself into a place of uppercase and or lowercase advantage. But if you fail the check, you will be placed into, uppercase and or lowercase disadvantage, right? And maybe that advantage or disadvantage could be simply what I said, the aid system. advantage, inspiration, disadvantage, using the 8 system. Or maybe you have a random chart, and that chart could be tricking someone to flying into a dead end, or having an enemy have a tapestry fall over the face of their mountain themselves, and they can't see, and they slam into a wall, or circling over above their heads and getting behind them, so that you can get behind them, and they are now the one that's being chased, and you are now chasing the enemy instead of vice versa. Or you fly towards the sun, so that when you go to turn and dive towards them, they are blinded by the light of the sun, and then you're able to sweep past them and hit them. Or you put yourself into a position where you can do a charging attack. So your griffin, with its eagle claws up front and lion's claws at the back, can come slamming down at them from above, charging in a similar but not exact method that, say, a giant eagle would do the same thing. A predatory bird would do the same thing. So you could have a chart of, like, if you can spend your action to try to do a thing to get an advantage to have another thing done. What's another thing that you could do? Fly by to knock over the shingles of a rooftop so that something heavy falls on someone following behind you. And now, mind you, are you moving pieces on a board? No. Could you? Is there a way to do this with miniatures? Yes, but with a difficulty. Maybe putting miniatures using stacked chips to describe how high someone is. How to stack flying people over top of each other, especially when you have, since they don't need to be in the same space, can be a little bit difficult. But whatever the case might be, we want our PCs to be badasses. Incorporating too many rules might just be, it might work against you on that. And of course, lastly, as we start to power down here, when it comes to badassness, not imposing too many negative impacts from them trying to do the thing is a great way to make your player characters feel special and to feel like badasses. So an example would be, player characters are running across rooftops. Player characters need to make athletics checks to jump from rooftop to rooftop. Maybe one of the players is like, well, my character's acrobatic. Could I just run across, ropes or cables that are attached from one building to another? Can I run across the roof, run across the rope that is a clothesline? And you go, I hadn't really thought. Yeah, okay. You can use your acrobatics instead of athletics. That makes sense. All right, go ahead, go for it. And the players are like, cool. Okay, I'm going to do this. So we've stolen a MacGuffin. The city guards are down on the street below. Some of the guards are climbing up into the buildings to get to the rafters and the rooftops, and they're going to chase after us. But we need to get across the city. Once we get outside the city-state walls, we should be safe, right? And the game master's like, yeah. Okay, so it's going to take you 5 rounds to get there. I'm not even measuring your movement rate. It's going to take you 5 rounds. You need 5 successes of escape versus 5 successes of the guards to surround you. You're like, cool, that's great. So you're saying the first person to get 5 successes wins? You're like, yeah, that's it. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump across the roof. And you're like, well, the roof is like 5 stories in the air. Cool. I'm going to jump across the roof. And then, boom, boom, wow, player character fails. Now, do you have them fall 5 stories to the ground to their possible death and or capture? Or do you allow them to dangle by their fingertips, or have their cloak caught on an outcrop or something like that? The inverse proportional mechanism to cinematic action is that when PCs are acting, the fewer number of rolls, the more cinematic they'll feel. When they are reacting to something, the more rolls or more opportunities to escape a reaction, the more cinematic it is. So PCs jump across roof, they make a failure. You can say, you know what? I'm sorry, I dropped something. You can say, because because of what has happened, instead of you just falling 5 stories to your possible death and capture, you can make a strength check to hold on for dear life with your fingertips, but your movement's going to drop to 0 to your next action, right? You fall prone, you're technically going to be prone, dangling by your fingertips until your next action, or someone comes to help you. Cool, okay, great. I'm not going to fall to my death. Nope. Or you land on the balcony below. You've got to figure a way to get to the rooftop or push your way through into one of the apartments and maybe, run through the family that's sitting there and come out the other end or something. Kind of thing. Ooh. There, yeah, not going to do that. Thank you, Twitch bots. I appreciate you bots coming in. I'm glad you did that. And thank you, Dead Man, for stopping the bots. It's like, yeah. Thanks a lot for that, dude. Because I know you saw that too. You're just like, what the hell? So anyway, guys, you guys know me. I am the third pillar-ist of the RPG community. Yeah, revenge of the Twitch bots. The idea that using the environment should be a thing is my thing. I haven't been promoting myself as the third pillar-ist of the tabletop RPG community. I guess I need a t-shirt that says that. I could probably order that on Amazon pretty easily. And I use the word third pillar-ist, not environmentalist, because that brings up other connotations and triggering terminology. But maybe I should do something like that. Although when I say third pillar, that's also related to some other things that have nothing to do with role-playing games. So, and a lot of people don't know where the third pillar comes from, which actually comes from a blurb in 5th edition that talks about the pillars of gaming, with combat and being one pillar and social interactions being the other pillar. But maybe there's something we can go about doing that. The idea that we have in our tabletop community something that tends to be underutilized, I think is a disservice to all of us. And so I'm really a proponent of it, and even without the badassery that I'm talking about, because I'm an action movie buff, I love them. But even beyond all that, just being able to use the environment anyway to shape the narrative and to let the player characters, hell, and your NPCs, give them some sorts of advantages or whatever in the gaming world, whether you want to give your lizard men some sort of advantage out in the swamps by attacking the PCs from semi-deep pools of thick foliage, or climbing down from the thick canopy of a jungle down on top of the player characters, or the lizard folk using insect hives or tangled brush and all that kind of stuff for their advantage in their environment. I think helps shape the narrative of what's happening in your world, i.e. the player characters in the jungle. Jungles are dangerous. Lizard folk in jungles combined together makes it that much more dangerous. As I've said before, player characters, it's not just that sharks are scary in the water, it's that sharks are in the water in the first place, right? No one wants to be bit by a shark. Doubly so, no one wants to be bit by a shark underwater, right? Same thing for like alligators and just about anything else that's in existence. So, anyway, guys, I thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Please, as set below here, down here, follow on Twitch. I would really love to become an affiliate. You helping me become an affiliate will give me the opportunity to make this show better for you if you are a Twitchophile, and absolutely interact on YouTube, whether it's comments, likes, shares, get notified, and of course join the Discord over at Fantasy Grounds College. You join their Discord server. Once you join the Discord server, at Fantasy Grounds College. Slide on down on the left, past the administrators, the classrooms, down into the boiler room where the kids are having fun. So anyway, guys, have a great one. I will see you tomorrow on Future Friday, where we talk all things transhumanism, the expanse, altered carbon, eclipse phase, all that kind of good stuff. So anyway, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.